PCOS and tirzepatide, Zepbound, Mounjaro. Is there ever going to be a clinical trial that looks at this? And is there ever hope for getting coverage through insurance for this issue? Well, for the women who have been gaslit in the doctor's office for decades over PCOS, I've got some hope for you, and we're going to get into it on today's episode of On the Pin, the weekly dose. Let's jump into it.
Welcome to the On the Pen podcast with your host, Dave Knapp.
I can think of very few things that I hear from more women on than the issue of PCOS and wondering, will GLP-1s ever be covered for this condition? Are they doing any clinical trials that are even looking at this? I would say desperation is probably an understatement when it comes to the many women that I've heard ask about this specific condition. While I am not a woman myself, I can definitely empathize with the fact that this seems to affect many women in the On the Pen community. In fact, PCOS is estimated to impact at least 1 in 10 women. So that's a lot of you listening today. And so we have some really exciting things, an On the Pen exclusive to bring you on this podcast. I can't really think of a better topic to devote an entire podcast to than this one, given who follows us and how many people are dealing with this. So I hope that you'll stick around for that. I'm Dave Knapp. I'm the man on the Mounjaro. This is On the Pen. We're a patient-centric obesity medicine news platform. We're a best-selling Substack over at obesity.news. We have one of the highest rated podcasts in the country when it comes to medical podcasts. And so we just hope that wherever you're listening, wherever you're tuning in, that you'll subscribe and that you'll hit the notification button and that you'll engage with our content by training what we call the algorithm. That's the little Al Gore in the sky. And every time you like and subscribe and comment, you're training little Al Gore to feed you all of the information that you're getting in the future as well. And so let's train little Al Gore by hitting the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe, and doing all the things. This has been a crazy week. And before we jump into the PCOS news, I want to real quick fly over some of the big stories that we covered as On the Pen exclusives that got a ton of traction in the GLP-1 community this past week. So the first thing is we broke the news on January 15th that Zepbound and Mounjaro have now been approved for multi-dose vials. Right now we have the single-dose vials, these little guys. Multi-dose vials, meaning 4 weeks in one bottle, right? So you can adjust your dosing a little easier with the multi-dose vials, and then the multi-dose quick pen. So right now you get 4 of these for 1 month. The quick pen is actually a pen that works more like the Ozempic pen, where it's your full month's doses in one pen that is adjustable. And so those are going to be likely for the cash pay market, Lilly Direct, probably available in the early spring. We don't know anything about pricing yet, whether the price will continue to come down. But what we do know is that the Wegovy pill is kicking butt and taking names to the tune of tens of thousands of new scripts per week. And I think basically $149 to start that medication, it's going to put some pressure on the injectable market, especially on Eli Lilly, who's definitely losing some ground to Novo Nordisk on the Wegovy pill. So we'll see on the price, but I would expect that these presentations would be available through the cash pay market starting sometime probably late April, early May, sometime in that time frame. So that was an On the Pen exclusive that we brought you at obesity.news. If you want to jump over there, type that into your browser, obesity.news, and just put your email in. Then you'll get those types of emails directly to your inbox. So even when I am down for the count, and I've been down with COVID for the last week, our whole house has been sick. In fact, we've had both COVID and influenza A. So we've been going through, a steady state of tissues and humidifiers and all of the things, cold medicine, cough medicine, Tylenol, ibuprofen regimens. We have 4 kids. They've all been sick. My wife has been sick. We've still got 3 kids home from school sick today. So I am probably faring the best at this point. Thankful for that. So we don't have a ton of time to break and do the podcast today, but this was an important one that I wanted to make sure that we got out. So we got the breaking news out about the Mounjaro Quick Pens and the multi-dose vials from Mounjaro and Zepbound. We also put out an article that I hope that you caught about preparing to be without power during a major winter storm. For all of those who were in the line of that major winter storm that went through, we hope that you're all doing well, that you're all safe, and we hope that you were all subscribed to our Substack, because if you were, you got a great video and email outline about how to store your medication based upon the package inserts and what you can do, and just try to help you provide a little bit of information so that you were prepared for that from a medicine standpoint, which is not always at the forefront of somebody's mind when there's a big winter storm coming through. Is what are we going to do with our medicine? It's usually, what if we lose power? What are we going to do for food, water, etc.? But that medicine is, some of you have a pretty healthy stash of medication in your fridge. I heard anywhere from like, they had just not very much and didn't have to worry about it, to people who had like $10,000 worth of medicine in their fridge. So I hope that that was helpful. But this is probably the most important exclusive story that we did this past week, was this story on PCOS. And it's the one that, again, I think I mentioned this at the outset. I can hardly think of a podcast that's more deserving of a full podcast episode. And that's the idea of PCOS and treating it with tirzepatide. We published an article earlier this week at obesity.news on this, if you want to go check it out. But let's fly over what PCOS is. For those of you who may not be aware, again, this impacts at least 1 in 10 women. But for those of you who don't know, polycystic ovarian syndrome affects roughly 1 in 10 women. It's often under or misdiagnosed, and the symptoms are frequently minimized. Again, I have to say, I've been creating content in this space for 3 years now, and I think that it is probably one of the most egregious areas where women feel gaslit when they go into the doctor's office, because we're all, those of us living with the disease of obesity, are used to going in the office and hearing you just need to eat less and move more, and that your symptoms are going to be improved if you lose a little weight, from everything from the common cold to an ankle sprain. We hear that. But this is so prevalent in women that I think that it is one of the most common things experienced in the doctor's office. Is if you have irregular or absent menstrual cycles, ovulation dysfunction, fertility struggles, excess androgen symptoms, fatigue, brain fog, weight gain, all of those things, doctors typically want to point women back to their lifestyle and not this often, again, missed or underdiagnosed issue of PCOS. So it's historically been treated as a secondary issue to weight and framed as lifestyle adjacent. Like you chose this for yourself. So patients are frequently dismissed or guilted and gaslit. And I think again, probably thousands of times over the last few years have I heard from women who finally found a treatment that helped to alleviate some of these symptoms of PCOS, and that treatment was tirzepatide. And so PCOS has often been misunderstood because it's seen as a reproductive inconvenience, or the focus at the doctor's office gets placed on symptom management. Birth control and metformin are kind of like the standard medical interventions that you're going to hear from a doctor about. If you go in, you push for some sort of intervention, it's going to be metformin or it's going to be birth control. And those don't address the root cause of PCOS. So that lacks a disease specific treatment, right? It's just symptom management. And all of the clinical trials, and there have been GLP-1 clinical trials looking at PCOS, but they're often not looking at the right endpoints in terms of how we get insurance companies to cover, or what may ultimately prompt a pharmaceutical company to run a larger study. Most of it is weight centric, and the insurance companies kind of view that still as cosmetic. If we've learned anything in the last few years about insurance coverage for GLP-1s, is that weight is still very much viewed as a cosmetic issue. But when we're talking specifically about the biological connection of PCOS and what that does, it's closely linked to insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia, which drives that androgen production. It elevates the androgen levels in the bloodstream and disrupts ovulation. And then there's this hormonal feedback loop that worsens symptoms and just makes it miserable for women. Now, like I said, multiple studies have been done over the past decade, even some looking at GLP-1s like liraglutide, that's Saxenda, and Victoza, the early daily shot from Novo Nordisk, have been studied. And liraglutide showed improvements in weight and insulin resistance and some cardiometabolic markers, but some secondary menstrual improvements were observed also. However, these trials were designed with some major limitations. The reproductive outcomes were not the primary endpoints that they were looking at in these clinical trials, and they were not focused on regulators and what could ultimately lead to a label expansion of tirzepatide, or in this case, liraglutide. Now, there's a new clinical trial that started in January, and it's a registered phase 4 trial called Periods. And it's on clinicaltrials.gov. We'll link it in our link tree. You can find all of the links that we reference in our podcast at otplinks.com. So you'll be able to check out this specific study, NCT 0732611 is the clinical trial identifier, and it's sponsored by the University of Bonn. And there's 5 sites across Germany, all looking at premenopausal women with PCOS. The participants are all overweight or obese, and they're looking at tirzepatide versus placebo. And this is the cool thing. It's a 72-week trial with long-term follow-up included. So this is a very long clinical trial. And the endpoint, what they're actually looking at, the endpoint of the trial is what's most important here, because it's looking at improvement in ovarian function as defined by menstrual regularity and ovulation frequency. So they're not looking at weight loss as a primary outcome, not blood glucose as a primary endpoint, or insulin resistance, not cardiometabolic surrogates. The focus is on the core disease function, and that is the interference with the reproductive system. And this is why the endpoints matter, because the endpoints in these trials ultimately determine what a drug is considered for. They shape FDA labels in terms of what a drug gets approved for and the guidelines. They shape insurance coverage and the decisions that are made by insurance companies. And PCOS has historically lacked regulator-friendly endpoints in the clinical trials that have been run. And ovulation and menstrual regularity are measurable, clinically meaningful, and patient-centered, which allows insurance companies, again, to look at these differently, the FDA and the drug companies to look at these very differently. So the core questions this trial is asking is, can correcting metabolic hormone signaling restore ovulatory function in PCOS? And can it move PCOS sort of out of this clinical gray zone and into a identifiable disease that is modifiable by a drug intervention? So let's talk for a second about what this trial doesn't do, because it definitely stops short of creating an FDA indication for PCOS. It does not do that. It's not sponsored by a drug company with a clear stated goal of an FDA endpoint. But don't lose hope when I say that. It also doesn't guarantee insurance coverage because it's not a registrational trial. It's not sponsored by the drug manufacturer, and there's no announced regulatory alignment here. But what it does do is it establishes biological plausibility. It validates meaningful reproductive endpoints, and it de-risks future sponsor-led trials, meaning in the future, Novo Nordisk or Eli Lilly could look at this and say, we've seen this successfully run in a large-scale trial against placebo. This might be worth going after an FDA indication for. And it signals seriousness to regulators and payers. And I think one of the things that we need to also look at is that the FDA accepts high-quality international data all the time. Geography excuse me, is not a limiting factor here. The sponsorship and the intent of the study matter here. So positive endpoints or results could lead to, again, sponsor-led phase 2 or phase 3 trials by Lilly or Novo at U.S. sites with FDA alignment with supplemental indication pathways. It's the first trial that's really being done that's looking at paving a pathway for the type of trial that may ultimately land an FDA indication for PCOS. Now, if you're looking at it and you're going, wow, okay, great, Dave. So this is like, 10 years away. The important thing to remember is that off-label prescribing is already legal, meaning your doctor can prescribe anything for any reason that they deem medically necessary. What this trial will do is it will create data that strengthens the medical necessity argument that your doctor is going to make when prescribing it. And ovulation outcomes, which is, again, the primary endpoint, is harder for insurers to dismiss because it impacts prior authorizations, appeals, and employee plan designs when creating insurance benefits. And when you're looking at weight, again, we talked about this earlier in the podcast, the endpoints of weight loss are still largely viewed as cosmetic by both insurance companies and employers and society at large. Let's be honest. All you have to do is look at the comments section of anyone who is sharing about their GLP-1 journey on a large scale, and you'll see, wow, society has a long way to go. And insurance companies and employers are still, in that bucket. But employers might move faster than insurers when it comes to good data on this and ultimately put pressure on the insurance companies to cover this before we ever get a sponsor-led trial. Now, many women are already in the community telling me tirzepatide was the only thing that ever worked for my PCOS, and real life experience precedes what they're designing this trial for. I think this is just an example of science catching up very slowly. And I think in a way, we live in a world where that's almost inexcusable. It's almost inexcusable to me that women who have been taking Mounjaro or Zepbound or compound tirzepatide to treat their PCOS have now for years been ringing a bell, and only now are we getting a clinical trial that might pave the way to approval. I think that that's ridiculous. We live in a world where that stuff should happen much, much faster, especially with the advancements in AI and the nimble nature of these drug companies to spin up these trials. And now you're seeing even the FDA move to make it a little bit easier to run these clinical trials. And so I think that ultimately we'll see that improve. But what a frustrating thing to know that this is impacting so many women in a positive way, but it takes so long for us to get a meaningful clinical trial that could move the needle ultimately. So I hope that you'll check out this article that we did at onthepen.com where we link this. You can go to obesity.news, find the article, or you can go to otplinks.com and we'll link directly to the clinical trial. And I think this is a really positive thing. Is it enough, fast enough? No, but we get excited when things are moving in the right direction, and time does have a way of flying. We've been doing this for 3 years now, and the drugs that we were once talking about as being, this pipe dream are right around the corner. We've got oral GLP-1s. We've got them for $149 a month, which is insane to me given where we were even a year ago. And so time flies, and things are headed in the right direction. But wanted to definitely spend some time on this one with you today. If you found this video helpful, I hope that you'll share it with a friend. I hope that you'll save it, interact with it, and train little Al Gore. And I hope that you'll join us next week. Every Tuesday, we drop a new podcast, and we're live every Monday, Wednesday, Friday on our YouTube at 11 a.m. Central Time. Please join us. Like, save, share, send to a friend, and we'll catch you on the next one.